Every lie has a price, but some lies? Some lies cost more than entire countries make in a year. Right now, we're counting down the 10 most expensive lies ever told. In boardrooms, courtrooms, and investor meetings. We start at hundreds of millions, we end at a number so large it barely sounds real. And every single story follows the same pattern. A confident person, a compelling story, and a world that wanted to believe them so badly, it forgot to check. These aren't small-time con artists. These are CEOs, billionaires, and corporate empires that looked the world in the eye and said, trust us, while the truth was burning in a shredder somewhere. Some of them went to prison, some of them didn't. And the last one on this list, it might be the most shocking fraud in the history of money. Let's count them down. Number 10, the blood test that never worked. Theranos. Cost $700 million. Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford at 19 with a vision that sounded almost too good to be true. A device that could run hundreds of medical tests from a single drop of blood. Fast, cheap, and accessible to everyone. She raised $700 million. Investors included Rupert Murdoch, the Walton family, and Henry Kissinger. Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Holmes landed on the cover of Forbes. She was being called the next Steve Jobs. There was just one problem. The technology didn't work. Not needed more time didn't work. Not almost there didn't work. Fundamentally, scientifically, the machine could not do what she said it could do. But here's the part most people don't know. Theranos wasn't just lying to investors. They were running real blood tests on real patients, using machines from other companies, not their own, and the results were unreliable. People received wrong diagnoses. Some were told they had conditions they didn't have. Others were told they were fine when they weren't. And here's a detail that still gets me every time. Holmes allegedly deepened her voice artificially for years. A dramatic, low baritone in every public appearance. People who knew her in college said she spoke completely normally. The voice was part of the character. A costume she wore every single day. She also placed pharmaceutical company logos, including Pfizer's, on validation reports she sent to investors, implying Pfizer had endorsed her technology. Pfizer had done nothing of the sort. Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and sentenced to 11 years in prison. Her former partner, Sunny Balwani, got 12. She filed for presidential clemency in January 2025. The decision is still pending. $700 million. Gone. Because one person decided a story was more valuable than the truth. But that's just where we're starting, because the numbers are about to get a lot bigger. Number 9. The hedge fund that lost $36 billion in 2 days, Archegos Capital. Cost $10 billion in bank losses. Bill Huang had already been caught once. His previous fund, Tiger Asia, pleaded guilty to insider trading in 2012 and paid $44 million in penalties. Most people would be done after that. Huang wasn't. He started a new firm called Archegos Capital Management, technically a family office, which meant far less regulatory oversight than a traditional hedge fund. He used that freedom to build massive concentrated positions in a handful of stocks through a financial instrument called total return swaps. The key detail, he could control billions in stock without technically owning it. And here's what the banks didn't know. He was doing this with multiple banks at the same time. Each bank thought they were his primary lender. None of them had the full picture. He grew his portfolio from $10 billion to $160 billion using leverage that was, by any reasonable standard, insane. Then in March 2021, one of the stocks dropped. Margin calls hit, Huang couldn't cover them, the bank started selling, all of them at the same time. $36 billion in stock value, gone, in roughly 48 hours. Credit Suisse alone lost $5.5 billion. Those losses contributed to the bank's eventual collapse and acquisition by UBS. Nomura lost $3 billion. Multiple banks fired their entire risk management teams. Huang was convicted of fraud and racketeering in 2024. But here's what you can't miss. The banks that lost billions had willingly ignored warning signs because Huang was generating enormous fees for them. They didn't want to ask too many questions. The lie worked because greed made people look the other way. That theme, you're going to see it again and again. Number 8. The knight who built a Ponzi scheme on a Caribbean island. Alan Stanford. Cost $7 billion. Alan Stanford ran a Ponzi scheme for over 20 years through his bank in Antigua. He promised investors above-market returns on certificates of deposit. And for 2 decades, he delivered. Because new investors kept joining and their money paid the old ones. Classic Ponzi structure. But here's what makes Stanford's story uniquely wild. He was literally knighted by the government of Antigua. He became Sir Alan Stanford. The island nation gave him a knighthood because his bank was essentially propping up their entire economy. The regulators who were supposed to be overseeing him were benefiting from him. Stanford also sponsored international cricket tournaments, built hospitals, and positioned himself as a philanthropic hero. He once landed a helicopter on the pitch at Lord's Cricket Ground in London, carrying a glass case filled with $20 million in cash as a prize for a match he was sponsoring. The spectacle was broadcast worldwide. Behind all of it, $7 billion in investor funds was being stolen. The certificates of deposit that investors thought were safe were backed by nothing. Stanford is now serving a 110-year sentence. He will die in prison. Most of his investors got back pennies on the dollar. Some got nothing at all. Number 7, the gold mine that never existed. Bre-X Minerals cost $6 billion. In the mid-1990s, a tiny Canadian mining company called Bre-X claimed to have discovered the largest gold deposit in history, deep in the jungles of Borneo, Indonesia. The stock went from pennies to over $280 per share. The company was valued at $6 billion. Mining giants scrambled to partner with them. The Indonesian government got involved. Everyone wanted a piece of what was being called the gold find of the century. There was no gold. The company's chief geologist, Michael de Guzman, had been salting the core samples, literally sprinkling gold dust into the test results to make it look like the site was loaded with gold. When independent testing was finally ordered and the truth was about to come out, de Guzman fell out of a helicopter over the Indonesian jungle. His body was found days later, badly decomposed. The official ruling was suicide, but the body was so badly deteriorated that identification relied almost entirely on dental records. Some investigators questioned whether it was actually him. Conspiracy theories that de Guzman faked his death persist to this day. When the fraud was confirmed, Bre-X stock went to zero overnight. $6 billion in market value vanished. The founder, David Walsh, died of a brain aneurysm before charges could be filed. No one was ever convicted, not one person. Number 6, the crypto king who played video games while stealing billions. FTX cost $8 billion. Sam Bankman-Fried built FTX into one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges in the world. He was worth $26 billion on paper. He testified before Congress. He donated millions to political campaigns. He was on the cover of every major business magazine. He played the role of the responsible face of crypto, the adult in the room. Behind the scenes, he was funneling billions in customer deposits to his personal trading firm, Alameda Research. Money that people deposited to trade crypto, their money, was being used to make risky bets, buy luxury real estate in the Bahamas, and fund political donations. And here's the detail that captures the whole thing perfectly. During meetings where billions of dollars were being discussed, Bankman-Fried was reportedly playing League of Legends on his laptop, not metaphorically. He was literally gaming during business calls. His inner circle lived together in a $30 million penthouse. Multiple executives were in romantic relationships with each other. The company had almost no accounting infrastructure. There was no board of directors in any meaningful sense. When FTX collapsed in November 2022, $8 billion in customer funds were missing. Bankman-Fried was convicted on 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. At sentencing, the judge noted that he had shown a willingness to gamble with other people's money. Some gamble. Now we're getting into the top 5. And this is where the lies get bigger. The systems that protected them get more disturbing, and the numbers start to feel like something out of fiction. If you've been watching this far and you're finding this as wild as I do, stick with it. Because the next 5 stories, they're on a completely different level. Number 5. The company that didn't exist, but was worth $24 billion. Wirecard. Cost. $2.1 billion missing. $24 billion in market value destroyed. Wirecard was a German payment processing company. It was once valued at $24 billion and was a member of Germany's prestigious DAX stock index, the equivalent of being in the Dow Jones. It had replaced Commerzbank, an actual bank that had been in that index for decades. But $2.1 billion on Wirecard's balance sheet simply didn't exist. The money was supposed to be sitting in trustee accounts in the Philippines. When auditors from EY finally tried to verify it, Philippine banks said the accounts were fake. The documents had been forged. Here's the part that's absolutely infuriating. The Financial Times had been publishing detailed investigative reports about suspicious activity at Wirecard for years. The journalism was clear. The evidence was mounting. Instead of investigating Wirecard, Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, investigated the Financial Times journalists. They filed a criminal complaint against the reporters for potential market manipulation. The regulator attacked the people trying to expose the fraud and shielded the people committing it. When the truth finally came out in June 2020, Wirecard stock lost 98% of its value in days. The CEO, Marcus Braun, was arrested. The COO, Jan Marsalek, fled the country and has not been found. He's believed to be in Russia, possibly under the protection of intelligence services. A $24 billion company built on forged bank statements, and the country's own financial watchdog helped it survive longer. Number 4. The garbage company that cooked its books. Waste Management. Cost. $1.7 billion in overstated earnings. In the late 1990s, Waste Management, one of America's largest waste disposal companies, overstated its earnings by $1.7 billion over 5 years. Executives manipulated depreciation schedules, failed to write down impaired assets, and inflated the reported value of the company's landfills and truck fleet. Systematic, deliberate, and sustained. But here's what makes this entry matter beyond its own numbers. That $7 million fine was supposed to be a wake-up call. Andersen was supposed to fix its practices. Instead, the firm went on to audit Enron and did the exact same thing, but on a scale that dwarfed everything that came before it. The waste management fraud was a dress rehearsal, and Andersen passed the audition. Number 3. The telecom giant that fabricated $11 billion. WorldCom. Cost. $180 billion in investor losses. WorldCom was the second largest long-distance phone company in America. Its CEO, Bernie Ebbers, was a former high school basketball coach from Mississippi who'd built a telecom empire through aggressive acquisitions. Wall Street loved him. Behind the scenes, WorldCom was reclassifying billions in ordinary operating expenses as capital expenditures, a simple accounting trick that made the company look far more profitable than it actually was. The total fraud, $11 billion in fabricated assets. And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The person who found it wasn't a regulator. It wasn't an auditor hired from the outside. It wasn't a journalist. It was an internal auditor named Cynthia Cooper. She and her small team worked nights and weekends, sneaking into the office after hours because they suspected something was wrong and knew that if management found out they were looking, they'd be fired. Or worse. She found the $11 billion discrepancy. She reported it to the board. WorldCom filed for bankruptcy shortly after, the largest bankruptcy in US history at that time. 30,000 employees lost their jobs. Investors lost an estimated $180 billion. Ebbers was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was granted compassionate release in December 2019 and died at home a month later. Cynthia Cooper was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year. She never got a promotion at WorldCom. She got a magazine cover after the company she tried to save had already burned to the ground. That's what doing the right thing looked like inside one of the biggest frauds in American history. Number 2. The energy company that became a verb for corporate fraud. Enron. Cost. $74 billion in shareholder value. If you only know one corporate fraud case, it's probably this one. But I promise there are details here you've never heard. Enron was an energy company based in Houston that transformed itself into a Wall Street darling through financial engineering so complex that even professional analysts couldn't fully understand what the company actually did. That was the point. The complexity was the camouflage. Executives used off-balance sheet entities, essentially shell companies, to hide billions in debt and inflate profits. The company reported revenue of $111 billion in the year 2000. It was the 7th largest company in America. But here's the detail that always gets me. In an analyst call in 2001, a hedge fund manager asked CEO Jeff Skilling why Enron couldn't produce a balance sheet like every other public company. Skilling's response, live on a recorded earnings call with hundreds of analysts listening, was, "Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that, arsehole." That moment should have ended everything. Instead, the stock barely moved. The company's auditor was, again, Arthur Andersen. When the investigation began, Andersen employees shredded thousands of documents related to Enron's accounts. The shredding became its own scandal. Andersen was convicted of obstruction of justice and surrendered its license to practice. An 89-year-old accounting firm, once one of the big five, gone, erased. When Enron collapsed, shareholders lost $74 billion. 20,000 employees lost their jobs. Many of them had their entire retirement savings in Enron stock because the company had actively encouraged them to put their 401ks into company shares. When the stock went to zero, their retirement went with it. CEO Jeff Skilling served 12 years. CFO Andrew Fastow served 6. Founder Ken Lay was convicted but died before sentencing. The word Enron is now used as shorthand for corporate fraud in courtrooms, classrooms, and newsrooms around the world. That's the true cost of the lie. You become a dictionary entry. But even Enron isn't number 1. Number 1, the man who stole $65 billion and nobody noticed for decades. Bernie Madoff. Cost. $65 billion. This is it. The largest financial fraud in the history of the world. Bernie Madoff ran a Ponzi scheme for at least 17 years, possibly longer. He told investors he was generating consistent, market-beating returns through a mysterious strategy he called a split strike conversion. The returns were remarkably steady, 10 to 12% year after year, regardless of what the market did. Bull markets, bear markets, recessions, it didn't matter. Madoff always delivered. It sounded too good to be true, because it was. Madoff wasn't investing the money at all. He was depositing it into a single account at Chase Manhattan Bank and using new investors' money to pay old investors' returns. The most basic Ponzi structure imaginable, just executed at a scale nobody thought possible. But here's where this story goes from shocking to genuinely infuriating. A financial analyst named Harry Markopolos figured out Madoff was a fraud in 1999, 9 years before the scheme collapsed. He submitted detailed mathematical proof to the SEC showing that Madoff's returns were statistically impossible, not unlikely, impossible. He did this not once, not twice, but multiple times over nearly a decade. The SEC ignored him every single time. Markopolos later testified before Congress that he feared for his life during those years. He believed Madoff had connections to organized crime. He thought exposing the fraud might get him killed. He kept investigating anyway. He kept sending the letters. And the regulator that was supposed to protect investors kept looking the other way. When the 2008 financial crisis hit and investors started requesting withdrawals, Madoff couldn't keep up. The scheme collapsed. He confessed to his sons, who reported him to the FBI. Total losses reported by investors, $65 billion. The actual cash loss was closer to $17 billion. The rest was fabricated profits that never existed in the first place. But try telling that to someone whose retirement evaporated overnight. Here's one last detail. Madoff's two sons both died after the scandal. Mark Madoff hanged himself in 2010 on the second anniversary of his father's arrest. Andrew Madoff died of cancer in 2014. Bernie Madoff himself died in prison in 2021, serving a 150-year sentence. The trustee recovering funds for victims has recovered over $14 billion, an extraordinary achievement, but still just a fraction of what was stolen. So there it is. 10 lies, from $700 million to $65 billion. From a fake blood test to a fake investment empire that ran for nearly 2 decades while regulators sat on the proof. And across every single story, the same pattern appears. A confident person, a compelling narrative, and a system that wanted to believe them so badly that it forgot to ask the obvious questions. The cost of these lies isn't just financial. Employees lost careers they spent decades building. Retirees lost everything they'd saved. Patients received wrong medical results that changed their lives. Entire companies, some of them nearly a century old, were erased from existence. And the part that should stay with you, in almost every single case, someone tried to sound the alarm before the collapse. An internal auditor working late at night, sneaking through files she wasn't supposed to see. A financial analyst writing detailed letters to regulators for 9 years straight. Journalists publishing investigations that regulators then tried to criminalize. Employees who saw something wrong and said so, and were ignored, dismissed, or attacked for it. The lies didn't survive because nobody knew. They survived because knowing was inconvenient. If any of these stories hit different than you expected, or if there's a fraud you think deserved a spot on this list, drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one, and the best suggestions genuinely shape what I make next. And if you want more videos that dig into the real stories behind money, power, and the systems that let all of this happen, subscribe. The next one is already in the works. And trust me, it's a good one.